Good evening, friends. Welcome to the India Power Talk. I am truly humbled with your encouraging messages on the previous talks, and I have to sincerely thank you all for the same. I have been receiving valuable suggestions and inputs from many of you, which I would certainly try to take them in our next following sessions. As you know, India Power Talk, in association with Indian Chamber of Commerce, the oldest chamber of chambers in India, Law Sikho, India's largest online education company, and now we also have India SME Accelerator Network, is an initiative wherein we invite international leaders to seek their insights, experience, strategies on how to revive Indian economy. We would be inviting entrepreneurs, economists, professors, investment bankers, scientists, lawyers, chartered accountants, and professionals having experience from diverse sectors who could contribute on the subject. Salah Kandri, the global head of education, in his report published in the World Economic Forum in May 2020, observed that the pandemic has not just shuttered economies around the world, but has also battered education system in developing and developed countries. Some 1.5 billion students, close to 90% of all primary, secondary, and tertiary learners in the world, are no longer able to physically go to schools and colleges. The impact has been dramatic and transformative as educators scramble to put in place workable short-term solutions for remote teaching and learning, particularly in emerging markets, where students and school face additional challenges related to financing and available infrastructure. And to talk on this subject and his experiences and ideas, we have today a distinguished and action-oriented Dean of Texas A&M University, Robert Adia. But before I ask him to speak his mind, let me have the privilege of giving his brief introduction. Dean Robert Adia, a graduate of Princeton University, Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs, and Yale Law School. Dean Adia served as law clerk to Judge James R. Browning of the U.S. Court of Appeals. His scholarly interests revolve around questions of regulatory and institutional design, especially in the financial arena. Prior to joining the Texas A&M University faculty, Adia was the professor of law at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. During his tenure at Emory, Adia also served as associate dean of faculty and as vice dean in those capacities. He helped to lead a broad transformation of the composition of students' body, the faculty, and the degree offerings and curriculum of the law school. Dean Adia has served as a visiting professor at Columbia and Georgetown Law Schools, as well as Princeton University. He has also visited at the Institute of Advanced Studies, the University of British Columbia, the University of Warsaw, and Singapore Management Universities, among other overseas institutions. Sir, I have privilege and pleasure to welcome you to the India Power Talk. Could you begin by sharing your impressions on the importance of US-India relationship and global education before we really go into further subjects?
Let me begin by thanking you, Mr. Puttar, for having me here to participate in the India Power Talk. It's a great opening question that you raise, because I think there has never been a more important time for India and the United States to engage one another. And so it's a distinct honor for me to participate and to join the distinguished visiting speakers and participants in the Power Talks that you've had to date, and to have the opportunity to speak with you, given your own distinguished record in engaging so many of these important issues in the legal field. So first, again, on why I think this is an important time for India and the United States. Of course, we know that the United States and India are the two largest democracies in the world. Now, that's been true for a long time. At the moment, however, I would suggest that there are challenges to democratic rule in the world today and to democratic liberalism in the world today that are critical challenges, and are ones that it is important that democratic nations come together, understand one another, engage one another, learn from one another in a meaningful way. And so, in that sense, as the two largest democracies in the world, there has, I think, never been a more important time for our two countries to engage one another at every level. Now, even beyond that, I would highlight the economic engagement that exists today between India and the United States. Now, at some level, that's not entirely new, but the truth of the matter is, if we look at the dramatic growth and increased sophistication of the Indian economy and industrial sectors, if we look at the rise of particular industry in computer sciences and pharmaceuticals and other areas that are really significantly engaged with global trade, and hence with exactly the marketplaces in which the United States is participating engaged, then it's not surprising that as much as the US and India have been engaged economically now for decades, we are now at an inflection point when the future really will be shaped by the economic engagement of India and the United States in a way that it has never been before. Against the backdrop then of those two things, it seems to me that academic engagement between India and the United States, economic engagement, even social engagement and understanding are all vitally important. These are all things that we should all be attending to, whether we are lawyers like you and I, whether we come from the business sector, whether we are from the engineers or come from the health sciences. In all of these areas, it seems to me there's a critical importance of increased engagement, increased awareness, and increased understanding. So that's India and the United States broadly. If I look then at the United States, at the global community as a whole, we are also at an important moment, I think, in terms of global education. So just as an increased level of understanding and awareness between India and the United States is important, it seems to me broadly, as human knowledge advances and grows increasingly in a geometric fashion, the level of education necessary to thrive and survive in today's world is that much greater. And it's not enough to say, I'm a distinguished, successful student and academic and educated individual in India or in the United States, or for that matter, in China or in Germany or in the UK or Canada or Brazil or any place else. The reality is that as the world becomes more economically interdependent, as technology makes it truly a smaller world, the need for us to be educated, not just more educated, but more globally educated, is that much more important. And the last thing I would say there is that I think for India in particular, there is opportunity in global education because of the the youth of the population as a demographic matter, and the consequent benefits and power of or impact of more education and more global education in terms of job opportunities, in terms of networking opportunities, and really in terms of being meaningfully connected with the world in which you and I are getting old, Mr. Puttar. But our students, young people today, will be practicing law and working in industry and working as engineers and in healthcare in a very different world than the one in which we have grown up and we have operated. For them especially, and maybe especially in a emerging economy and emerging democracy like India, global education is vitally important.
Thank you so much for the introductory remark, Dean Nadia. The adoption of online solution in the recent months has been unprecedented. As Mr. Kandari in his report published in the World Economic Forum has rightly observed, that the pandemic has been a great leveler in a way, giving all stakeholders, including educators, learners, policymakers, and society at large in the developed and the developing countries, a better understanding of our current education systems, and more so, the vulnerability and the shortcomings. More fundamentally, COVID-19 is causing us a challenge, deep-rooted notions of how we deliver education, of the role of colleges and universities, the importance of lifelong learning, and the distinction we draw between traditional and non-traditional learners. Now, how according to you, you see the How do you see the evolution of online education and cross-border engagement between various universities?
Wonderful. Well, let me say again, I think everything, the observations you've made, the observations of Mr. Khandri in the report, they really are spot on. They really reflect the fact that our world was already amidst a kind of seismic change in terms of the nature of education, and the COVID-19 pandemic has really, in some sense, both accelerated that trend and taken it in new directions. I would start in terms of thinking about the nature of the changing landscape of education with, even before we get to online education, the ways in which education more generally is changing, is evolving. So a few things, really three things that I would mention in that regard. The first is that given this geometric progression of human knowledge that I mentioned earlier, the rate at which knowledge is increasing, the reality is that our traditional model of we finish our primary school studies, then we do secondary studies, then we do graduate studies, and then we maybe do undergraduate studies, and then maybe we do graduate studies, and then we're done with our education, is no longer a viable model. The reality is that those who stop learning after their PhD will, within 10 to 15 years, be no longer viable employees, no longer will be viable sources of knowledge, so on and so forth. We talk about this notion as one of lifelong learning. The idea that increasingly our model has to shift from we learn for a certain number of years and then we work for a certain number of years to a lifelong trend. In fact, the way it sometimes is drawn is, if you see, I'm going to do this direction, the timeline of someone's life, that the educational model is like this. You are constantly looping back and learning more, and you go forward and loop back and learn more. So that lifelong learning trend, I think we have to be conscious of. So when we think about who will be the students at Indian universities, at US universities, at my university, Texas A&M University, they will increasingly be folks who have been in the workforce for 5 years, 10 years, sometimes even 20 and 30 years, but who are coming back to build their knowledge again so they are prepared for the next 10 and 20 and 30 years of their working life. For similar reasons, a second phenomenon in terms of where education is going, I think that's important, is this notion of stackable credentials. Stackable credentials. So traditionally, if you wanted to get a master's degree, or I wanted to get a master's degree, we would go and we would start on day one, and then we would progressively march through the coursework and earn our credits. And when we had enough credits, we would earn our master's degree. Increasingly, the way knowledge and education looks is one acquires a certain educational credential, could be a certificate. It could even be just a single course or an executive education program. If that program is valuable, opens the pathway to additional learning opportunities, I might then do another course that builds on that initial course, right? Now I've taken 2 courses or 2 certificates. Now we go beyond that and do a further one. So we are at the moment, Texas A&M, my university, is talking about a variety of programs in India in terms of educational programs, not just for lawyers, I should say, but also for engineers and for physicians and for folks in finance and computer science whose work intersects with law and regulation and the like. But the way we are structuring it is, we are structuring it in the form of certificates that someone earns one certificate, and if they finish that certificate and they are done, they have earned their certificate. But they can choose then to earn a second certificate and to stack that certificate on top of the first one. And if they then earn a third certificate, collectively those certificates will add up to a master's degree. So that's a second important phenomenon, I think, that is changing the nature of education globally, and even in our individual countries. And the third way in which it's changing, and then I'll turn to online education. The third way in which it's changing is it is increasingly interdisciplinary. The nature of educational programs is such that we recognize that because knowledge is increasingly interdisciplinary, education must likewise be interdisciplinary in that fashion. So to say, I am a great engineer, but I don't know anything about political science or law or
finance,
regulation
or finance for that matter.
or finance, exactly, will not suffice. You are not a great engineer. Likewise, a lawyer who purports to be a great lawyer, but who does not in fact understand a little bit of finance and business, a little bit of science and engineering, is not going to be a great lawyer, right? So I think that, again, in these three ways, please.
Absolutely. I fully agree there. In fact, as a corporate lawyer, I'm seeing that, along with the law degree, I wish I had also the commerce degree to help me
Right.
understand the balance sheets and financials of the companies. So I encourage a lot of young students these days that if you wish to become a corporate lawyer, you must understand finances, you must understand balance sheet.
Exactly.
You must, most importantly, you must understand how do you market yourself.
That's exactly. So that's a perfect example. And again, it's those three things, whether we're talking about online education or residential education, whether we're talking about education in India or in the US or global education, those three things, this notion of lifelong learning, this notion of stackable credentials, and the importance of interdisciplinary training should motivate all that we do. So turning to online education then, it seems to me online education, offers opportunity in three important ways. Again, the first is in terms of access and affordability. So again, I mentioned to you, we are now building programs. Texas A&M University, my law school, is building programs in India. The cost of those programs will be less than half of what the cost is to earn that degree here in the United States. Why? Because we are able to, as a matter of scale, as a matter of who the instructors are, as a matter of the cost of housing and food and even physical plant, we're able to provide that education at a much lower cost. What that means functionally is online education becomes an opportunity for access that would not be there otherwise. And that's a huge and important thing because of everything we've already said. If knowledge is more important than ever, we need to find a way for the masses to have access to education rather than it being limited to the elite. So that's one thing about online. The second thing I would say is that, again, comes back to what we've talked about a little already, cross-border engagement. So we are building programs in India that will create opportunities for Indian lawyers to sit alongside US lawyers, but not just that, also Saudi Arabian lawyers and German lawyers and Chinese lawyers. Now, that educational environment is basically putting our students, putting our future graduates in exactly the setting in which you, as a corporate lawyer, practice today. When you go into a corporate negotiation, the person across the table may be Indian, but they may be German and they may be Japanese and whatever. And so if you have earned an education in a setting in which you have been exposed to that geographic, global, cross-border opportunity for engagement, you will be that much better a negotiator, that much better a litigator in an international arbitration than you would be otherwise. So I think online education allows us to do that because you can log on from India. I can log on from Colorado, where I am right now. Someone else can log in from the next place, and we're able to nonetheless have an intimate educational experience. Now, all of that is only possible, and this is the third point about online education, is only possible because of the technological advances that we've made. Once upon a time, online education was a kind of correspondence school. Like you would get the stuff in the mail, you would read it, you would fill out some things, and you'd mail it back in. Today, the opportunity for meaningful engagement, what you and I are doing at this moment, you and I are having a conversation that in some ways is as intimate as a conversation as if I got on an airplane, flew 17, 18, 20 some hours, and was then sitting in your living room doing it. Now back to COVID, I can't do that today, right? Yes. And yet you and I can still have this conversation. So the technological advances have made it possible not just for us to do this, but to do it at the highest level. So today, there is the opportunity, and this is how A&M, when we are building online programs in India, our aspiration is those programs should provide as good an experience, as good an education, as high quality and interaction as a student would get if the professor was sitting in the room with them in Delhi. So that really is why I think, again, today there is huge opportunities because the technology now allows us to do this in a much more significant and effective way.
Great. I fully appreciate and I understand where you are coming from. The accessibility, affordability, the cross-border engagements, and the technological advances. I think we need to combine, and I'm so glad that whilst we are sad about the several deaths because of coronavirus, but I must say that I am seeing the entire education system is getting rebooted virtually, and we all are rethinking and we all are redesigning virtually the entire education system, and that's a great advancement, I would say. And I've been talking to several distinguished professors across the globe on this subject, and I'm finding that's very interesting because everybody is talking now, talking on the same page. We are all on the same page now. Anyway, that's truly great insight, and I'm glad, Nadi, that you are, designing a lot of programs around this. Could you now dwell upon Texas A&M Law School? I know, last time when we spoke, and you spoke very passionately about the law and other streams, and in particularly what your engagements and increasing engagements with India. Could you dwell upon that, Nadia, a little bit more?
Well, in some ways, the way to think about Texas A&M Law School's engagement in India is it follows from everything we've already talked about. Why are we engaging India? Because India is so vitally important today. Why do we want to create educational opportunities? Because we recognize the value of global engagement for our students. Why are we structuring the programs the way we are in terms of stackable credentials, interdisciplinarity, and so on, is because of what we've talked about. So in some sense, what I would say is that what we are trying to do is to figure out what are the opportunities for collaboration in India with degree programs, with executive education programs, with industry collaborations that will allow us to have that positive impact in terms of positioning India and the people of India and the industry of India to be able to thrive in India, in the United States, and all over the world. That really is everything we are doing is with that in mind. So what are some of the elements of that? I will say in some ways, it starts from the fact that Texas A&M University is today the largest university in the United States. So we are a very large university now, 70,000 plus students we have at the university. It is also a university that is very much committed to advances in engineering, in computer science, and in other areas in which it has the opportunity to enhance the well-being and the health of the global community, of the world community. In Texas, we are in Texas in particular, and two things I would highlight about Texas that are important for why we're engaged with India. One is India is a fast-growing country. Texas is a very fast-growing state. Texas is by many measures the fastest growing state in the United States, in terms of population, in terms of corporate headquarters, in terms of economic growth otherwise. It is also a country that it is also a state, I should say. It's a state that if we were a country, I should know, Texas would be, I believe, the 8th largest economy in the world if it was its own country. But we also have a very large Indian expatriate community. So the Indian community in Texas is very large, in Houston, in Dallas, Fort Worth, where our law school is. And because of that, in turn, Texas is also a prime target for Indian corporate headquarters. There are a good number of Indian companies that have chosen to set their US headquarters in Texas, given everything that I've described to you. So against that backdrop, what is the law school doing in India? What are we doing in terms of India programs? So start with the most basic one. We want to create opportunities for Indian lawyers to be able to further their education. How do we do that? One way we do it is what I've talked about, is by offering online programs. So we are developing an online LLM in collaboration with LawSeco and others we are working with to create a online LLM program that we believe will, in a very cost-effective way, provide an excellent educational opportunity in the area of intellectual property law, patent law, business and commercial law, and arbitration and negotiation. as initial areas.
I see.
We recognize that for some students, there may be an interest, a desire to spend time in the United States, but students are not able to come and spend a year. And so for those students, we are collaborating with a number of law schools in India, with Jindal Global University, Global Law School, with GNLU, and with others we are talking to and collaborating with around creating programs that will allow a student to begin their studies for the LLM in India, then come to the United States for 1 semester to Texas A&M.
I see.
And earn their LLM. And not only earn their LLM, but earn their LLM from both institutions. So earn both a Indian LLM and a US LLM during that course of study, during that period of study. We are also expanding our programs for non-lawyers. So Texas A&M University has one of the biggest master's degree programs offered by a law school for non-lawyers. And the basic idea is that if you work in the energy industry or in the healthcare industry or in the finance industry, it turns out that law and regulation and compliance are very important to the work you do.
Yes.
So we have developed this master's degree program, including an online version of it, that allows students who are non-lawyers to develop enough of an understanding of law to be able to succeed and thrive in their profession, be it finance or healthcare or engineering or whatever it might be. Some focus of that is on intellectual property, some of it is on financial regulation, other areas as well. So those are degree programs that we are developing. We are also developing a set of non-degree programs, certificates and executive education programs, including in collaboration with others. So for example, next month, together with the Confederation of Indian Industries, the A&M Law School will be offering a program that is focused on Indian corporate folks working in Indian pharmaceutical companies, to help them understand the pharmaceutical landscape, both on the business side and on the legal side, more thoroughly than they otherwise might understand it. And we are looking for opportunities to collaborate with other industry partners, not in pharmaceutical industry, but also in finance and other areas, to be able to collaborate on programs like that. We are organizing symposia and conferences and executive roundtables together with industry partners in India as well. Finally, the last piece that I would mention is, in general, we want to think about what are the things that we can be doing to add value in a direct way. So this is a little bit of training for judges, training for folks in other areas, in training in mediation, training for folks in other areas, not necessarily industry, but other areas in which the expertise of Texas A&M Law School might be valuable. So that is a long list, obviously, and we're keeping very busy with it. But the reason I give that list is to highlight the ways in which what we really want to figure out is, where are the academic partners, the industry partners, the public sector partners that Texas A&M Law School can work with to advance India's objectives to be a global powerhouse economically, socially, politically, and legally. That's really ultimately our goal.
That's really a great vision and great commitment, I would say. And I'm glad that you are so passionate about doing several things, and I always believe that the academia and the industry connect both have to work very closely to each other, because you can't have degrees in isolation and industry working in a completely different line altogether. So the collaboration between industry and academia is extremely important, be it finance, law, pharmaceutical, or any industry for that matter. And the more and more we integrate industry and academia, I think the advancement of education, advancement of the knowledge, domain expertise in that area is going to just increase.
There is oftentimes what I think of as a false dichotomy that is created. There is practical education, industry training, executive education, and then there's academic education.
Yes.
I think actually both are incorrect. The reality is that an academic program that is not deeply intertwined with industry knowledge and insight and wisdom is not going to succeed. But to be clear, an industry program that says, we're just teaching you the basic stuff, we don't want any of this mumbo jumbo theory, ultimately is not preparing the people who are being trained for the reality that the world is going to look very different in 5 years and 10 years. And so if all that I am doing in my training is teaching you what is true now, rather than teaching you the questions to ask and how to prepare for that future, I'm not preparing you as a good employee. So really it is the case that industry needs academia and academia needs industry in terms of programs.
Absolutely. I would request you to still dwell upon two more aspects, Dinardia. One is we have SME Accelerator Network, India SME Accelerator Network also as part of the India Power Talk. Now, what would you say about the startup world or the SME or the small mid-sized companies, MSME companies? We have almost 6 million, MSME, micro and small entrepreneurs and startups. What would you advise them, or how do you see growth of that? How do you see academia playing a role in enhancing their capabilities in terms of marketing, HR, finances? How do you see that, panning out?
Absolutely. So again, the first thing I would say is, if you look at all the economic data, a huge amount of innovation and even huge amount of economic growth is not coming from the largest industries, right? Oftentimes it is coming from small, medium-sized enterprises and even micro enterprises, that they are driving the patterns of growth and economic development and the like. So it is a hugely vital sector for us to be thinking about, to attend to engage with. In terms of the academic sort of component of that, what I would say is that for law schools, for example, our law school, Texas A&M, we have a very extensive network of clinics, we call them law clinics, that basically work with those who need legal services and need support for legal services, but can't afford to get them on the open market, right? So one connection is that academic institutions and perhaps particularly law schools need to be thoughtful about the ways in which they can capitalize on their expertise and their knowledge and their student body to create opportunities both to educate students and to provide these services to SMEs. And the last thing I would say is that, from my vantage, oftentimes big companies will have either the actual knowledge or the exaggerated confidence in their knowledge, that limits the ability for them to take in cutting edge knowledge from academia. So if we are smart as academic institutions, we do well to think about SMEs as a target audience, because they, in some sense, may be more receptive. They don't have someone sitting in the room who is saying, no, I know better than the academic institution. But frankly, they also don't have enough of a track record to be likely to say, we don't need this silly knowledge. We know what we're doing already. So in that sense, that would be another source of opportunity.
Okay, great. One last question is, and very, very, very close to my heart is, and I always aspire that something needs to be done there, is how do you see, internship, whether it is lawyers, whether it is accountants, or whether it is engineering students, how do you see, is there any scope for online internship for students from different streams?
I will say it's a brave new world we are living in. If you had asked me that 6 months ago, I would say, well, you can do it, but you can't do it very well. But the reality is my son is 18 years old. He's getting ready to go to college in 1 year. So he had all these internship plans that fell apart. So quickly he started sending some emails and making some phone calls, and now is doing these several internships that he's never met the people in person. He talks with them like this on Zoom. They have a Google Doc that they edit together. So the reality is that I think, again, the coronavirus in some ways has opened up people's minds to the universe of possibility in a different way. So what I would tell young people is, don't shy away from pursuing the opportunity, right? Even if you can't get to the United States or can't even get to Delhi or Mumbai, or Kolkata, think about what are the ways in which this world we are now living in and the technological advances we've talked about potentially create those opportunities. Because there really is there is a huge, goes back to our conversation about the value of both academic learning and industry education. An internship is really at that intersection. You are a student, but you are you're being educated in a setting that is the real world, quote unquote. And so I think that's a wonderful opportunity. Again, I'm an old man, but I would say in just the last 3 months, let alone 6 months, I have seen that emerge as a real possibility in a way that I could never have imagined just a few years ago.
Absolutely. It was truly amazing, Dee Nadia. Thank you very much for taking out time from your busy schedule and sharing great insights and experience, and in particular the experiences and your ideas about internship, your idea about academia and the industry connect. I would like to thank the Indian Chamber of Commerce, LawSICO, and India SME Accelerator Network for being with us. Let me conclude my vote of thanks with a humble prayer as usual to the Almighty to bless the mankind with right spirit to fight the coronavirus and restore the world with peace and happiness. It was a pleasure talking to Dee Nadia. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Poddar. Great pleasure for me as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.